The majority of renovation projects go over budget because they don't start with the right figures. I'm going to walk you through how to prepare your budget, all the different people you need to talk to, and the questions you need to ask them throughout the quoting stage. I'm Paige, founder of Blüne Architectural Design Inc. I'm an architectural designer slash technologist slash business owner, so safe to say I have a lot going on. Blüne Inc. is based in Toronto, so keep that in mind when watching our videos, as the building code and zoning provisions may be different depending on where you live. Let's get on with the video. Starting off with the wrong figures at the start of your project can lead to you designing and getting permits for a project that you can't actually afford. If this does happen, that means you will have to dial back once you get your permit, once you actually get final quotes from a contractor, and that usually means design revisions to the drawings and then also resubmission of a building permit. These are all things that do also add up, but of course, more importantly, it's time it takes to get it done. So that's why at the start of the project, it's super important for you to work with the right numbers. Speaking with a contractor or an architect is a great place to start, but often this is the point where homeowners do get confused on what's included. You may not know the questions that need to be asked if they're not upfront with it in the first place. This is really common when it comes to first-time renovators. Contractors may not always disclose what's included, and architects may only give a quote for their parts of the work, whether it includes tax or not. So there are a number of factors that can lead to a project going over budget right from the get-go. So what you need to do when reaching out to a contractor is to ask them what is included. A contractor will prepare a quote for you that includes all of the base building materials and labor. So that would be things like roofing, the framing, the foundation. Usually they don't include materials such as fixtures and fittings, which would be things like tile in your bathroom, backsplashes in your kitchen. It's usually not included in the contractor's scope. If you want to have them included, you can speak with them and kind of work that out into the quote. However, typically it's not standard, at least here in Toronto. So usually what will happen is some contractors will have an allowance. They'll call it an allowance for the owner to spend on these finishes, or they may say in their quote that it's to be owner supplied, which means that you as the owner have to purchase them directly. You're going to Home Depot and you're going to pick out your finishes and order them yourself. You're working with an interior designer or an architect on choosing the finishes. Generally speaking, if you are working with an interior designer, they will provide you with a selection of materials and finishes that will be purchased through them. And when that happens, usually they make a little bit of a commission, but they still usually give you a trade discount on all of the materials that you purchase through them. These are all things that need to be brought up during the quoting stage so that you can figure out what you prefer. So construction costs are around 40% of your total budget. They are going to not include tax traditionally. So that will include material and labor for your base building. It also includes labor to install your fittings and fixtures. And it includes the profit margin for your contractor, especially if they are a general contractor, which means they oversee the entire project. Then that will be all lump sum into that 40% construction budget. With an architect, the important things to know that are included are their design, their drafting to prepare the drawings, both for design and permitting, as well as the permitting itself. And some architects will be your point of contact throughout construction. So they'll be observing the construction. This is called construction administration. Not all architects do this, and it's not always necessary for your project. You want to have an architect on site when it's a brand new build, but if you are doing a renovation that is interior, or even if it's an addition, it's not fully necessary to have an architect on site all the time. You usually have a GC, or you as the owner would monitor what's going on site. And do they represent you with the city for permitting? So that means, do they submit all the permits for you, get the permits, or are you doing that as owner? Depends on what you want to do on your end. It's usually cheaper to submit by owner. However, a architect or architectural designer will be able to submit for permits and also planning if it's needed. And generally that's a lot easier of a route. It takes a lot more time if you submit by owner because you need to figure out how the whole process works, where an architect or an architectural designer already knows how the process works. So I highly recommend that you get a professional to take care of the permitting process. So those three areas, design, drafting, and permitting, should be included in your architect's quote, and construction administration is optional. So design fees or consultant fees range depending on who you need for your job and also the type of professional you choose. So as a general rule, 16% of your overall construction budget will go towards design fees. This could be architects, this could be architectural designers who are less expensive than an architect. There could be a structural engineer, there could be a mechanical engineer involved, or equivalent to that would be an HVAC designer, which again is a less expensive option. However, you need to check your region, what is allowed for stamping drawings. You don't want to have drawings that you can't actually submit for permits or can't actually build. So make sure you check all of that out before signing with someone. You may need an interior designer, and you may need other people such as an arborist or other engineers, or soil control, vibration control, or shoring. So all of these factors could come into play, so that's why we say 16% is a general good rule for consultant fees. The next thing that you need to include in your budget is the permit fees. This also could be planning fees as well. So if your project needs to go through planning to get approval, there usually is a lot more fees associated with that. It's about a 1% cost of your overall budget that will go towards permit fees or planning fees. So whichever option you need, and that's another question for your architect to decide whether you need planning approval or not. They usually have an idea, at least at the start of the project, whether you will need it or not. Those things will need to be accounted for. There could be development charges as well, and this is very common for brand new houses that are on lots that don't already have a sewer hookup, which could be anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, $200,000, depending on the size and the location of where you're building the house. The next item to budget for are fittings and fixtures. So these are the areas that are pretty customizable and are varying depending on what your taste is and your budget. So for quoting purposes, there are 3 levels of build quality. You have standard, which is your economy finishes, so your basic needs, nothing too fancy. Then you have mid-range, which is a next step up. So maybe some things are more of higher quality than your basic line, which obviously means the expense goes up a little bit more. And then you have high-end or luxury, and that means all that matters is quality or the finer things in life. So that could be marble tile instead of going with ceramic. So figure out which one is your path and what makes the most sense for your budget. As much as we all would love to have high-end things, it could be that you're in between basic, so then you're at mid-range. So fittings and fixtures are around 30% of your construction budget. That is going to include your bathtubs, your toilets, your faucets, your sinks, your vanities, your cabinetry, your backsplash, your tile, your hardwood floor, your furnishings, even if you want to go that far, depends on if you're going to use your old furnishings, and that is usually 30% of your total construction budget. The next area that you need to budget for are contingencies. So we usually say 4% of your total budget is to be saved for unexpected expenses. This could be when you're doing demo that you uncover that the floor is rotting, and especially when it's structural work, it's always quite expensive. And it's never a fun thing to find out. However, that is why we plan for those unplanned expenses. If you don't end up using that money, that's great. You can use that money towards either your regular savings, or you can throw that into your fittings and fixtures budget to maybe go a little bit more higher end than you initially thought you could. You should have at least 10% of your construction costs saved for contingency, or 4% of your total budget, which would include all of the other areas that I've mentioned so far. The next item to include in your budget is tax. This is usually 9% of your total budget. This particular one will vary depending on where you live. Here in Ontario, sales tax is 13%. So construction costs generally don't include tax. Consultant fees are including tax, and fittings and fixtures include tax. So your construction costs would multiply by 13% so that you can account for the tax. It's the worst case when you are paying everything at the end and you forget that you do owe that 10 to 20% in sales tax, and it's a big surprise, and a lot of homeowners have made the mistake of forgetting about that because it's so common for contractors to not talk in numbers with tax. So don't forget to include that in your budget.